cup at a time. Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference. One cup at a time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time.
Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. It is tea time with Miss Liz. That's right. We're here on a Monday. Who knew, right? Usually we're here on a Thursday, but today we're here on a Monday because we have a rescheduled guest from January. As everyone knows, Miss Liz fell sick in January, but we are back, and all of the guests that missed in January will be back in February, March, and April. So they have all been rescheduled. So look forward to that. So today I have an incredible guest in the back room waiting. It is Mr. Ian Hatton. That's right. We're doing Totally Morpheus, leading Totally like Morpheus this morning. And you might be wondering, Morpheus, the Matrix. No, we're not doing Matrix this morning. We're doing a lot of different stuff this morning. So we're going to just do the disclaimer, get a little bit of the bio, and then I'm going to pop in the incredible guest who's waiting in the back studio to get a strong TEA out to you this morning. So let's get into that right now. The disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live shows. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time shows hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith, however may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect that and I will see you at a later date and a later show. There we go. We got that going. Now let's get a little intro and bio into Ian Hatton. And you guys will be amazed because it isn't anything Matrix. So we're going to get into that really deep. Ian's going to share with all of you. So he's a conscious leadership expert, international keynote speaker, owner of Totally Morpheus, leadership development. Ian Hatton is a conscious leadership expert where he offers exclusive leadership development programs. Over the past 2 decades, he has trained and mentored thousands of leaders around the world. The young leaders he has mentored as a community service has gone on to make a significant contribution in industries and society. Today, with his community of conscious leaders, Ian explores what is possible as we lead from our authentic essence and call out the same authenticity in others. a former president of the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa virtual chapter. Ian has also been inducted into the Southern African Educators Hall of Fame for his work in conscious leadership. So now let's get Ian in here, and I'm going to take a sip of tea and let him take over for just a few seconds. So let me pop him in here. So welcome, Ian. It is an honor to have you here this morning.
Miss Liz, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be with you.
And my tongue is just a rolling this morning. Like I'm so excited about this morning and the leadership. So Ian, could you share with the audience and viewers that are watching a little bit more about who Ian is and how we got to Morpheus?
Yes, certainly. So my career can almost be divided into two sort of 20-year blocks. The first one was me in the IT industry, believe it or not, where towards the end of that career, 21 years ago, I reached a point where I said, this leadership is not being done right, including my own, including the way I was leading my team. I was working for Microsoft at the time, and I just realized there had to be more. And I got really riled up or was excited about this idea of authentic leadership. And then a year or two later, after I'd left the corporate world and was starting to do leadership development work, I got together with a group of friends, and we were all sort of saying, well, if we zoom out at our lives, what is our bigger purpose and this sort of thing? We probably have some sort of a mythical or mystical name that could be associated with that purpose. And so we got together a couple of weeks later, and we were having this whole conversation around, oh, well, this one is Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings, and this one is River from Serenity. And these names came up. And they got to me, and I said, look, I'm clueless. I don't know. I've thought about it for 2 weeks. I have no idea. And one of them looked up at me and said, but it's obvious. And I said, what do you mean it's obvious? She said, no, but you are Morpheus. And I went, what do you mean I'm Morpheus? I'd love to be Morpheus, but I'm not Morpheus. And suddenly, everybody else turned and said, no, but you are Morpheus. And so, who is Morpheus? So, originally the Greek god of dreams, the one who awakens dreams in others. So, this is part of the heritage that I've inherited, and I wake people up, and then of course later Neil Gaiman wrote the Sandman comic book series, and that lead character was also called Morpheus, the one who awakens dreams. And they say that the Morpheus of the Matrix was based on Neil Gaiman's Sandman, Morpheus. And, so Morpheus is not, if you think of the Matrix, Morpheus is not the hero. Morpheus is the one who raises up the hero. Morpheus is not the political leader or the military leader, but he influences the political and military leaders. Morpheus is the one who carries on believing when everybody else has stopped believing. And these are characteristics of me. And so I had to concede I am Morpheus. And it took me a few years before I could say that out loud in confidence. So, yeah, that's the background to Morpheus.
Well, I just learned something new because I didn't know about Sandman and being Morpheus, and that was his name. And I really didn't know what Morpheus did in the Matrix. I was trying to always figure that guy out. I was like, what does he do? So I need to go back and watch the Matrix, and really pay attention to Morpheus instead of Neo.
Well, what's fascinating about that is most people say the first movie was brilliant and the other two, next two not so good. And then, of course, last year we had the next one as well. But for me, all three of the original movies, in terms of the character development of Morpheus, is really, really significant. And the things that he went through in terms, just one simple example is Neo is obviously the hero. And he's been trained by Morpheus. He finally starts to believe that he is the one. And then they have this major crisis where they are basically doomed. And Neo takes the decision about what he's going to do. Neo is the one who flies. And so this sort of raising up reaches a point where there is a release. And that's another major characteristic of Morpheus-style leadership that many people don't get. I've got a friend who says that the role of a parent is not to raise children. The role of a parent is to raise adults. And it's that thing of raising up so that they can function independently. And I believe the same applies to leadership, that our job is raising our people so that they can fly. And believe in themselves, and be able to do that and make sound decisions and contribute without being under the sort of thumb of the leader that raised them.
So, Ian, what got you into leadership?
My own leadership failures.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because a lot of people are all about the win-win-win. We need to fail in order to lead. We don't learn and we don't grow as leaders if we don't fail as well, right?
Totally. And I mean, I had an interesting career, 20 years in IT, and a lot of that was in leadership and management roles. And a lot of my biggest failures were as a manager, where I had direct reports. And a lot of my biggest successes were as a leader, where I had people to influence who didn't report to me. And I think I learned a few lessons about that, because the reliance on positional power actually depletes the impact of good leadership. And so I had a few failures as a manager, and I had incredible successes where I had no direct reports, but large groups of people to influence. And I think there's something about raising kinds of leaders where they don't need a position to lead. I'm not anti-position, but where they're actually leading and influencing based on what's inside of them, not relying on a position. Because I found when I relied on a position, I was terrible. I was much better when I didn't have a position to rely on.
Well, sometimes we get into that, the roles, the titles, and we lose our way, right?
Yeah.
One thing I found when I did some research on you, Ian, was you love energetic words, moving words, rising words. As a little boy, how was it for you? Did you have those words given to you, or did you learn that in your adulthood?
Well, it's a bit of both. I think there were, my family situation was quite humble, and I don't mean poor. I just mean that there wasn't arrogance. There wasn't this sort of, rah rah kind of thing that existed in our family. Everybody was just accepted for who they were, and that worked really well. I think, though, I felt sometimes a little bit like I was the odd one out, because most of my family is a little more on the introverted side. I'm definitely a little bit more on the extroverted side, and it came from who I really am, I think. And then as I became an adult, I started to become more and more comfortable with what was inside of me. And I'm a believer in the best leadership we can do comes from our essence. It comes from who we authentically are. And but I do remember this, that when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, I remember being in a church service and watching somebody up front and going, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be on a stage. I'm going to be speaking and inspiring. And I realized that it was in me. Many people have dreams to be a fireman or a pilot or an entrepreneur or something. Mine was to speak. It was always to speak. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons why I shifted my career so thoroughly 21 years ago.
Well, when we're kids, right, we're always like, we see that one person or that one location, and we're like, we're going to be here when we get older. Like when we get to be a big person, we're going to be here, right? And we're going to enjoy ourselves. So you mentioned the stage. So how did it come about you becoming a speaker?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting, because when I was at school, I was actually quite shy as a teenager, and I didn't get onto stages. But I realized the yearning was actually there. I just, I was being a teenager, and so what happened is that after I'd finished my high schooling, and so I did some youth work, where I went all over Southern Africa, and they made me a team leader. I mean, I started at the age of 19 as a team leader, and they made me a team leader, which meant I had to speak. And I'll never forget this. There were 2 occasions quite close to each other. The first was we were being introduced to a bunch of people in this organization, probably a few hundred. And I had to get up and introduce my team. And I suddenly realized how energized I was about doing that. And then a few weeks later, we were sort of being commissioned before we got sent out to do this work all over Southern Africa. And I had to do the same again, plus a little bit more. And I suddenly realized that I've got this energy, this flow, this vitality when I'm on a stage speaking. And in fact, let me give a bit more detail. I feel like when I'm in that position on a stage, and it's not an arrogance, you know how we often talk about when you're on a stage, you're kind of acting, you're putting up an image. For me, it's almost the opposite. It's as if I'm really myself when I'm on the stage. There's no more inhibitions. There's no more pretense or mask. And so I find I'm very authentic. I feel energized. I feel physic. I can feel my body. I can feel that I have this flow that happens. I spot the audience and I see things on people's faces, and I bring that into what I'm talking about. And so it's like a bit of I was going to say an out of body experience. Maybe it's an in body experience. Just a state of flow when I am on a stage and speaking. And it's an energy that I don't really experience any other point in my life, even though I have a very full life.
Well, we have Marie here who's saying that leaders should be speakers, and I agree with that, because if we want to lead, we have to have good speaking skills as well. And that's how we also learn our team, by speaking and leading. So I want to get into some of the things that you do, Ian, because you do quite a lot. Like, you do amazing things. Yes, Miss Liz does her homework. All of my guests get homework assignments for Miss Liz. So I really want to get into the lead like Morpheus keynotes. How did you come about the keynotes?
So I guess what happened is I reached a point probably about 5-6 years ago where I realized that speaking was the essence of what I do. I do, by the way, also do a lot of leadership development work, a lot of leadership training globally. I've worked with leaders from more than 90 countries now in doing that. But I realized that the pinnacle is me giving a presentation. And this whole idea of conscious leadership is an evolution of my original idea of authentic leadership, and it's really come up as an idea of taking what I said earlier on about how Morpheus led in the Matrix, and the origins and the Greek god of dreams and all that sort of thing, and going, well, let's make that practical. What does that actually mean? What does it look like to lead like Morpheus? And the analogies go way beyond the Matrix or something like that, but it's really getting down into some real nitty gritty, and it's kind of a perspective on leadership that I haven't experienced in the typical textbook stuff. And so I have a module of that, which is called Awaken, which is when I'm speaking all about how we awaken the essence of our people, and we build that. We can't assume that because they've got a talent that's a strength. So we build on that, and then eventually we can release them, and that's the sort of Awaken module. Then we have something which I call the method, the Morpheus method, if you like, and that one is another part of leading like Morpheus, and it's about a kind of a process that you go through with people all the time, but of a cyclical thing that goes over and over again. Is they struggling, or they're stuck, or they're having a conversation, or they want to go further. And connection, we've got to connect with our people. There's got to be a very strong connection. Then once they feel heard, because that's really what connection is about, them feeling heard, they are then open to hear alternate perspectives. And I call that stimulating different perspectives. And then from there, I invite them to challenge themselves to go and break the mold. So this is another sort of different perspective. And then the final perspective I call impact. And this is really where leaders grow their own consciousness. There are things like their self-awareness, their physical awareness, their emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, and these kind of things. So they build this consciousness, but their consciousness is of self, it's of their people, it's of the environment, it's all of those things. And then that brings in a tenacity. I mentioned earlier on, Morpheus believes when everybody else has stopped believing. It's a tenacity because of the depth of inner work that's been done. And that's what brings the success, which I call the triumph. And so that's what the impact is. It's conscious tenacious and triumphant. And that tenacity and that triumph means it's impacting the impact we have as leaders on our world. It's impacting through our people, the impact that our people have on their world. And that can even be multi-generational. So it could even be a legacy impact. So those are my three main components of the Lead Like Morpheus process. There's also something about team, but those are the three core ones.
Is that where the symbolize comes in? Because I noticed your necklace and I noticed with your the logo. Where did that come from, Ian?
Yeah, so it's a thing that the shape has always intrigued me. And in some time ago, 2019, I was in Scotland, and I saw one of these necklaces. Now, we already had this as the brand. And by the way, the red dot on there is the red pill. You need to take the red pill. So that's part of that whole thing. But I saw this particular layout of necklace when I was in Edinburgh, and I thought I've got to have this. And the one that I had, was just sort of a very flimsy plating, and so which wore off after time. And so I took this to a silversmith and said, "Can you make me a bigger one that goes they call this a triquetra. This thing is called a triquetra. It's a Celtic symbol." And this particular one, they just took the ends and turned it into a heart as well. So that's kind of, you can get a feel a bit about me for that. So this triquetra, it's an ancient symbol. It probably predates Christianity or those sort of symbols, but it was adopted by the Celts, the Celtic people of Scotland and Ireland and even Wales, as some sort of a symbol of a trinity, I guess, was part of that sort of thinking. But I just love threes. I'm such a person of threes, and 3x3s and this sort of thing. I mean, I've got three values, connection, freedom, and impact, and everything works in threes for me. And I guess in some ways I'm just a really simple guy. I struggle when things get more complicated to fours and fives, especially. But this thing of threes, if you look at it, if you think about the human hand, our fingers have three segments. You could also say that we have a palm, fingers, and a thumb. It's another three. You could also say that our arms consist of a hand, a forearm, and everything's in threes. There's so much of who we are that's in threes. And I just love it. It's simple. I always remember. I can never forget things when it's in threes. Of course, a little bit like TEA is also a three, isn't it? So
it is.
Yeah, I love threes.
And I love that you're saying three, because and now you're making me look at my body in a different way. I'm like, oh my God, my finger is three. Because we need these things, right? We need to understand our bodies, our minds, and our hearts, and that as well, because the heart also is three, right? The three beats of the heart.
Yeah.
I really like the logo. The logo is amazing, and I love the history of it, because we need history. And that's what T is, right? T is the past, the present, and the future. And that's why the hyphens are in there, because we all have a past, we all have a present, and we all have a future. So where are we taking our tea? How do we serve our tea? And what is Ian's tea this morning?
So my tea, as I try to relate those three letters to who I am and what I am, and I love that who and what. The T is team. For me, everything that I do is about team. It's about synergy. I believe every one of us is a genius and has genius. And that genius means that I have a genius in me, but it simultaneously means I have some debilitating weaknesses, some areas where I am really not clever. In fact, I can feel quite stupid when I'm doing those things. I can feel slow. I can feel drained. And so when I can combine my uniqueness, my genius with other people's genius, that team is beyond, the typical 1 + 1 is 3. It actually sort of becomes a 1 + 1 is 11 kind of thing. And so team is definitely what my T is there. The E is engagement. I really believe in connection. I mean, you can see it as my number one value here as well. Connection is engaging people, having them feel heard, listening to them, connecting with them, asking great questions, empowering. It's all about engagement. And engagement for me is is right to the heart. It's not just an intellectual, which it can include intellectual, but it's engaging people, heart, mind, body, everything, emotions, especially really important to engage. And so that's going to be my E. And then A is activation. I am an activator. I am someone who really brings out action. It's not like I'm going go, 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 go. I'm not that kind of activator. But when we have processed, when we have discovered who we really are or what's really needed in a situation, for me at that point, action is the next step. It has to be an activation. And so I'm an activation catalyst, and that's where my A is. So that's my T.
Oh my goodness, that is such a strong T. We got strong T this morning. But I really want to get into the mind. And that's what and a lot of people they come on tea time and they're like, oh, Miss Liz, you're giving me a cup of tea. We ain't doing beverage tea here. Yes, Miss Liz drinks tea. My tea is right here for everyone. But what we really do here on Tea Time is we do what is your tea? And it is what we serve, what we give to everybody, who we serve, why the passion and the purpose. And Ian, that's what it is for you. It's the leadership, the speaking. That's your passion. That's your purpose. And that's why you're serving such a strong tea and an amazing thing. So for all the viewers and listeners that are listening and that will catch the replay, let Miss Liz know what your TEA is, because I'm always interested to know, because not one tea is the same. And you can serve the same tea, but in your own way. For Miss Liz, it's teaching educational awareness. So if your tea is that, serve it. Just serve our teas. Be honest. And Ian, you had mentioned a few minutes ago how when you get on a stage, that's where you feel you're more yourself. And I'm that same way too. When I speak, I feel I'm more alive than put that mask on. Where a lot of people are okay in live camera action and it's acting time. For me, it's real time. You're getting me. You're not getting anyone else but me. So I want to get into the consciousness of the mind, because you use that word quite often in your presentations and that as well. For the viewers out there that don't understand what a conscious mind is, could you share a little bit on that?
I'm going to start by telling a story.
Okay, awesome.
So,
I love stories.
So I had this wonderful vision 21 years ago. I completed a master's in organizational leadership. I left the corporate world, and I was now, I was going to go and change the world. I've got this vision, and I've got the training, and now I'm going to go and change the world. And we know how that ends, don't we? It does not go as planned. So what happened is I established a business which was moderately successful. I did a whole lot of work in a bunch of areas, but something was missing. There was something that wasn't really working. And when I did my master's, I was relieved, and this is all in hindsight, I was relieved to when I discovered that there was no subject on self-leadership. And the reason I was relieved is that I thought, well, I'm not great at self-control, so I don't want to go down this self-leadership role. I'm just gonna learn all these good things, and I'm gonna bring them to the world. And I reached a crisis point in 2011, where three major things happened, all in very quick succession. The one was my wife asked for a divorce. Another one was that my spiritual community no longer worked for me, and I was looking for something to leave that completely. And the third was I sold my shares in my business to my business partner, as I realized that wasn't working for me anymore either. And that took me to a point on starting an inner journey. I was burnt out. I was really struggling. I moved to a coastal area here where a friend allowed me to use his place. And I took a decision to wake up every morning and look out the window and say, my number one job today is me. Not my only job, but my number one job is me. And so I started to learn some things. I did a little course with Brene Brown long before she was really famous. I would do a little bit of mindfulness. I didn't even understand meditation at that point. I did some mindfulness exercises, and I discovered a bunch of things. I discovered an awareness of my body that I hadn't had before, an awareness of my emotions. I realized there were some darker things in there something which I call my monster, which I discovered, and started to engage with that and just become so much more aware of everything. But here's the crazy thing, is that I was doing leadership development work in between in this time, and I suddenly discovered I was having a deeper impact than I had been, although I hadn't changed a single technique. And there was something about, as I became more conscious of myself, I somehow was imparting something different when I was doing leadership training and leadership development. And I was getting stories back from people saying, you did this thing and it was so wonderful, I could use it with my team, but guess what? It changed the way I parented. It changed my marriage. It changed other things. And so the feedback was at such a deeper level. And I suddenly became aware this consciousness is actually the substance of great transformational leadership, where the impact is so transformative. But I didn't have the term yet, because the term conscious leadership only really emerged in about 2016, so it was about 5 years later, where I think the first Forbes magazine article came out on this idea of conscious leadership, and they described it as a conscious leader is a leader who's been on the inner journey. And I was like, yeah, that's me. That's what it is. And that's what I invite people, is to go on that inner journey and bring their consciousness in all aspects of who they are to bear. And not even just to bear, but just that inner journey will produce better influence on the outside as well.
Well, that's an empowering story, by the way, Ian. Thank you so much. And I really love inner work. As you know, I serve the inner cup of tea, right? So I'm serving you the past, the present, and the future. So when we dig deep and we do the inner journey, we truly do make a change for all of our lives, right? Not just in our work life, but in our relationship lives and children and everything. So Ian, I want to get into what inner journey have you taken yourself on to get to where you are today?
Well, yeah, the big awakening was that back in 2011, and it started at a very, I was quite religiously conditioned, and I think I had a lot of reservation about what this thing was about, and so there was a lot of unlearning and a lot of mindset transformation of opening myself up to things that I previously hadn't. So I guess there's multiple levels. I think emotional intelligence is a massive one. Becoming more emotionally aware, my own emotions, learning how to manage them, learning that just because I had a fight with somebody at work doesn't give me the right to kick the dog when I walk home, when I walk into home, or just because I had a fight with my partner doesn't give me the right to take it out on my staff members, So the emotional awareness and just learning that language and becoming aware of my own emotions was a really significant part of it, and the psychological things that go along with that, realizing that that there was this part of me which, as I say, I called the monster, and I needed to connect with that. But eventually, over time, I started getting trained, for example, in what we call systems coaching, where there's an awareness of systems. So there's this idea of organizational and relational systems coaching, ORSC, and I've been trained in that methodology, and just becoming aware of systems. That every relationship is a system, and you put a third person in, and it's a different system suddenly. So that was part of the consciousness as well. And while I was doing that training, I developed a whole bunch of new friends in that thing, and discovered that a lot of these people were really invested in meditative practices. And I eventually signed up for a 10-day silent retreat to learn more about solid meditative practices. And then from that, started to really become even more aware of the power of silence, the power of breathing, that kind of thing. I found that I thought it might sort of irk me from a more spiritual perspective. And on the contrary, it really allowed me to discover a lot more of what's inside of me, my essence, my spirit, my emotions, my body, all of these things, and connecting with my truest self. And so that was quite a journey. But the 10-day silent retreat, for me as a speaker, I thought, I could never be quiet for 10 days. It's impossible.
That's a long time, right?
It's a long time. And what actually happened was that wasn't a problem at all. I struggled a bit with the physicality of long meditative sessions. I was very obese at the time as well. But what astounded me is when they finally said, with on the sort of afternoon of the last day, okay, it's over now, we can speak. I found it noisy. I suddenly said, can we stop again? Can we go silent again?
Can we go back to the quiet? Right, when it's too noisy, sometimes it's overwhelming for us, and especially when we're given a message and then we're expecting this to happen and then this happens, we're just like, whoa, that's not what my mind was telling me to prepare for,
Yeah.
And then if you don't do the research and you don't look into stuff, right, sometimes it overwhelms you as well.
Yeah.
You speak about the systems and the programs and the emotional intelligence. That's something Miss Liz really needs to work on, because my emotions sometimes they overdo take me, and I have to understand that not everything needs a reaction at times. Sometimes we need to just sit back. So it's like you're saying in the story here, Ian, is it was quiet, and then when everybody started to speak, it was noisy, right? So that's where I'm like, okay, it's noisy. Take a step back and let's look at that. So you mentioned your programs. So I want to get into the programming in that. But before we get into that, Ian, I want to give a special shout out to Yada Media Virtual Media House for giving me the incredible Ian Hatton today to speak on leadership. So check them out as well. Check out the incredible work that they do, and check out Ian's work here. The websites and all of his locations are being popped up during the live video. This will all be in the information in the directory of the audio podcast. So if you're looking for any information, check out all of the write-up. All of this beautiful information will be in there. Again, I want to thank all of the viewers that are tuning in. We have questions and people popping up and leaving their comments. So again, I want to get back to Ian, and thank you to the audience that are watching and participating today. I really want to thank you for that. But I want to get into your programs, Ian, because you have such incredible programs and events out there. So before we wrap up your Teatime, because the time is just flying by, we're almost at 40 minutes here. So I want to get into the programs, events, and all of that good stuff. And I want to get into a little bit more on your tea and the words that you gave me.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. So let's start with some of the programs. So I think there's sort of three main areas that I operate in. The first, as I mentioned, is keynote speaking, and I've got a variety of keynotes. I've got a new trust one I've just developed, which is already going down extremely well. A couple of times I've done it. So the keynoting, big events. Some people are approaching us about speaking to their sales teams and various things like that. So that is a major product that we have, is the actual keynoting. And then the other two product ranges are sort of in two main areas. The one is what I would simply call leadership development. And so this is, what are the skills that a conscious leader can use in developing their team and their people. And there are four different modules in that. Well, there's a fundamentals, and then there's four modules, and they go into a bit more detail. And they include, how you develop your team, and then the other ones I mentioned already, the awaken and the method and there's a lot of detail in each of those. So that it's kind of, I guess, a lot of organizations will take a whole year to work through that, because it's quite a lot of content and development. And so that's the sort of leadership development side of things. The next part is actually the consciousness development for somebody who is looking for support in going on that journey and becoming a conscious leader. One of the first things we identify is that they tell us it's a lonely path, and they need like-minded people to relate to. And so I call this my Morpheus Genius products. So we have the Lead Like Morpheus and we have the Morpheus Genius. And the Morpheus Genius products are really around a community, a journey. They get coaching from me. It's quite a small community. You know, I only take so many people per year. Quite exclusive, but it's much more in depth, and there's a lot of connection between them. We have what we call tribal gatherings, where we discuss a lot of things, and we're learning a lot of things about the journey. There are subgroups within that called masterminds. They also are digesting and discussing these various aspects of this inner journey of becoming more conscious as leaders. So there's coaching, there's events, and then you mentioned events, and we've got events that link to all of these things. So one event that we have is something which we call the Who Am I Bootcamp, and this is where we take out 48 hours and really try and figure out who we are. Obviously, you're not going to figure it all out in 48 hours, but we get incredible feedback for two reasons. The one is the growth and the content from that event. And there's reflection time and so on, but we get just as much feedback about how it connects these conscious leaders to each other in that process, and how that has given them this community, this support community of becoming conscious leaders out there. We have another one which is Design My Leadership Retreat that links in with that, and we're busy putting together to be launched in October 2024, so it's still a little way out, and we're probably going to do this in Bali, in Indonesia, and we are launching what we are calling the first ever annual Totally Morpheus Conscious Leadership Summit, and where we're going to be getting people together, leaders from all sorts of places, and communing together and working like that. I mean, we have other events. I have a free monthly event called the Morpheus Intelligence Update. The next one, I think, is 2 weeks from tomorrow. And that is a particular subject. We're going to be talking trust this next one in 2 weeks' time. And that's trust. And every month there's a different theme for that. I could keep going, but maybe that's enough.
No. keep going, because Miss Liz loves it. And I love that you're goal oriented for 2024, because if we don't plan for the future, how do we make a better future, right? If we're just living day for day in the present, are we actually moving forward? Are we actually looking for changes to create changes? Create some failures. I'm looking for where I'm going to fail. So where am I going to learn? Because if we don't have these things, how do we grow? How do we move? And you mentioned a lot the word trust. Miss Liz has a lot of trust issues due to my lifestyle and my past and that. But I want to get into the word trust. What does trust mean to you, Ian?
So I think the important thing that most people get wrong about trust is they view it as a switch. They view it as either I trust you or I don't trust you. And trust is a lot more complicated than that. And what I mean by that is it's multifaceted, it's situational. A simple example, I trust my daughter, my younger daughter, she's 31 years old. I trust her explicitly. She's an incredible human being, but she doesn't have a driver's license, so I don't trust her with my car. So there's complexities to trust that we often don't understand. Another thing is that a lot of people view trust as, well, either I trust you until you break my trust, or I won't trust you until you prove yourself to be trustworthy. And again, I think that's too simplistic, because there are situations where I will automatically trust until broken. There are other situations where I won't, because it's not a safe environment. And so it's a lot more complicated. So we've developed a model, we call it the AIR model, where we look at trust from 3 different perspectives. And of course, it's a 3x3. Each one has 3 subcomponents. And the AIR stands for alliance. And this is all about how we relate, how we connect, the relationship. And if you think about this, who is the human being that you trust the most in the world? It's going to be somebody you've got a strong relationship with. So relationship or alliance is a significant component to trust. even if something goes wrong every now and then, somebody lets you down, if the relationship is strong enough, it can see you through. So the alliance is the first. The I stands for integrity. And that's, you know, the usual things of values and ethics and fairness and those sort of things, because unfair treatment will break trust very quickly. And the R stands for where can I rely on you? What is the rely? And reliance there could be, you know, the sort of dependability, reliability. It can also be your skills. I can rely on you for a particular skill. I can rely on you for a particular competence, a particular qualification. And the final bit of that is genius. Do we know each other's genius? Because if I can rely on your genius and you can rely on mine, we're going to have a stronger trust relationship. So that's my little air model. And so trust for me is multifaceted and it means different things for different people. You know, what we're now seeing is the cost of low trust is horrendous. It's almost, it looks like the statistics are showing us it's higher than the cost of low engagement, although very closely correlated. And so leaders' job is to become more trustworthy themselves, but to also build into their teams that a growth of trust and stronger connection. And there we've got the T again of team. And even what about the next step beyond that? How do we get our customers to trust us, and how do we get the people we influence to trust? So it's multi-layered and multiple perspectives. And yeah, trust is fragile. It's really, really precious. And so we use the air model because air is precious. You know, we can go months without food, we can go days without water, but we can only go minutes without air. And trust is that vital in our teams. And yeah, it needs to be restored, needs to be built, needs to be invested in, needs to be never be underestimated.
Well, I'm getting really so much from it because I do struggle with trust, and I'm putting it out there for everyone. But it's like you said, we have to build that trust, right? And I'm that person that show me wrong, prove me wrong. You know, I'm going to trust you, but if you break that trust, you know, and you show me different, like if your words and actions don't match, then I'm out of there. I'm gone, you know, work related, relationship related. But it's like you said, the relationship, we have to build the relationships, you know, and you have to have a good skills in order to have a good relationship. If you don't know your skills, you don't know yourself, your inner self, how can you trust, right? How can you reach out and be there?
So true. And part of that relationship building is being vulnerable, you know, and I'm not saying being vulnerable as a show. I mean being authentically vulnerable, you know, not manipulatively, but just kind of when I'm a little bit more vulnerable to you, you might be a little bit more vulnerable to me, and the depth of the relationship increases and the trust grows. You know, we're not talking about inappropriate vulnerability. So, you know, the average leader, especially if they're more introverted, is not wanting to hang their dirty washing out for their team. But for example, if they see a staff member is struggling and they can tell a story of how when they were struggling to learn a particular skill or a particular area, you know, just that little bit of vulnerability builds a stronger connection, builds a stronger trust, and empowers a better influence between the leader and the team member.
Well, I find that if you don't have the skills, right, you should be going out and looking for the skills to be taught to you. And that's why we have these leadership programs and incredible work like what you're doing, Ian, because we don't always have that skill, or we're not always taught it, you know, because we're learners. As human beings, we are natural learners, you know.
Indeed.
And if you don't want to learn, then there's something that's within yourself that you need to heal. You know, because when we're unhealed, we're not learning. We're closed-minded. The mind is closed, right? The conscious mind is closed. So we need to start healing ourselves. You know, and it doesn't mean that you accept everything and say everything is okay. You're allowed to say that it hurt, and you know that I do. I think when we're authentically and our integrity align, we're a better human being. We really make a difference, right? When we're truly being honest with people and say, you know what, I'm having issues here. Because when we're not speaking, we're not having that communication and that connection, we're not actually moving forward, are we?
Absolutely true. And in fact, it can actually move us apart when that lack of authenticity is there and the lack of being able to express what's going on.
So, Ian, you did mention the word in your teams, and you mentioned it in a couple stories and a couple examples that you've been giving. So, what does a team mean to you?
Ah, wonderful. So it's actually for me very, very simple. It's a group of people who are working together towards a common purpose. And that requires trust. I think without trust, you probably don't have that. So it's common purpose. So very often I'm working with managers and they say, oh, my team. And I say, well, tell me about your team. Oh, well, this one does this and this one does this. And is there anything interrelated? Do they have a common purpose? And they go, no. And I said, well, then you don't have a team. And then they're quite shocked because how do they help each other? How do they stand in for each other? How do they solve the bigger reason for the team's existence, that bigger perspective? So a common purpose is for me absolutely vital. And when we are clear about our purpose, everything else flows from that. So who am I bringing to this team? Actually, who am I bringing to this team's purpose? Suddenly we're on the same page and we're each bringing our unique contribution. How do we want to be together to achieve our purpose? Suddenly we've got focus on when are we going to meet? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to deal with accountability? How are we going to deal with conflict? It's all aligned to this purpose, and we've got that sense. And then finally, what are we actually going to do? Again, is the detail of achieving the purpose. So to me, the common purpose is critical. And what I'm finding fascinating is when you start doing that, not just with work teams, not just with leadership teams, which by the way is probably the area that needs it the most. Most leadership teams aren't really true teams at all. In fact, the research I think indicates probably less than 1 in 10 is a true team. But even I'm starting to see this with families. I'm starting to see people saying, well, what's our family's purpose? Partnerships. What is our partnerships purpose? What is our, and I think it's that commonality around purpose that builds and creates a true team. And especially if that is, focused on and grown.
Well, and I like that the purpose. I love the word purpose because if we don't know our purpose in life, how do we move forward in life? It's like we don't have the future. We're living day to day. We're in the present. It's okay to live in the present, but you have to always look for the future. Always look for what am I going to do in a month? Set small goals up. They don't and make them that you can be accountable for. Don't go and say, well, I'm going to be like something that's outrageous that we know that won't happen, and then be set up for that disappointment as well, right?
Yeah.
Ian, I want to get into the purpose of the family, the purpose of relationships. We need family in order to grow as a leader as well. That support. So when we don't have that support from our family, our main root, how does that affect our leadership skills?
That's such a good question. And when people have the full support, the relationships, the intimate relationships that they have, it is incredibly empowering, and it gives us certainty, a tenacity, a purpose. And I think that's really, really important. But many people don't have it. Many people come from scenarios where they're either not supported, or it's broken, or they are abandoned, or there could even be abuse. There could be all sorts of things. And, leadership is tough. Leadership is really, really tough. And one of the things that I often find myself talking about is very often leaders are saying, I'll give you a simple example. They'll say to me, oh, well, I'm not going to do this for my people until my boss does it for me. Okay. And that mindset I call the victim mindset. And the victim mindset to me is the opposite of conscious leadership. And I often have this, I didn't have what I needed. I'm not getting the support that I need. And leaders are people who operate, number one, outside of that conditioning, not ignorant of it, not ignoring it, not suppressing it, but aware that they're not getting the support. Secondly, they will go and find the support somewhere else if they're not getting it that way. They will be able to go and figure out. And we're seeing this with the Morpheus Genius programs, where very often we are providing that community because people don't have it at home, or we're providing it because the people at home are trying to be supported but don't really understand. There is that. But there's something else. I believe every generation of leaders, and maybe every leader, is called to bring something to the world that they did not receive themselves. And we see, for example, people who grew up in a broken home, who, for example, didn't get the father treatment that they were looking for, or the mother treatment that they were looking for. And the call is, where can you get that need met so that you can break that cycle and you can still provide what you never received? And that, to me, is the real call of leadership. Everybody knows the story of Nelson Mandela. I'm South African. And, Nelson Mandela didn't wait until the government changed to try and bring about change. He had to act outside of, so he was not fairly treated, but he had to act outside of that unfair treatment. He chose to forgive where he hadn't been forgiven. There's a few things like that, and to me, that is the mark of real leadership.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, Ian, that most people, when they lead the opposite of what they were given as a child. That's where my story comes in, is I don't want to play that victim mindset. Yes, a lot of bad things have happened, but I want to move forward and I want to change that for the next generation that's coming. Why do we have to keep the broken pieces? Why not start mending the pieces with some gold, and making a difference? So, Ian, we're getting close to the hour here. I want to have any final words that you have for any of the viewers or listeners out there, and how they can reach you.
Certainly. So let's just start with some sort of an overall idea, and it's simply this: that you are unique. Every single one of you is unique. There has never been anyone with your exact wiring that has ever lived, and there never will be. Statistically, the way that the wiring of the brain, and that's just the brain. I mean, we all have unique bodies, we have unique voices. I mean, there's so much more. But even just in the brain, there is so much uniqueness. And that says to me that every single person has something to offer the world that nobody else could offer. And that, to me, is really what conscious leadership is about: discovering who we really, really are in our essence, all of it, and bringing that to the world and influencing the world. That, to me, is my core overarching message. And to me, that's real leadership. Real leadership is 360 degrees. It's not only leading down, it's leading up, it's leading sideways, and it's bringing our essence to the world, nurturing it, growing it, and bringing it. And so, yeah, where can people get hold of me? Well, the primary one is always LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, I'm Ian Hatton. If you search Ian Hatton, you might not find me straight away because there are musicians and other people with the same name. But if you go on LinkedIn, it's simply /Ian Hatton, and that is that will get you me. And then there we do have TotallyMorpheus.com. We have other platforms as well, but for most people, LinkedIn. And on there we have, on my little background there, we have a lovely free conscious leadership assessment called The Egg. It's going through a big revision, so in about 2 weeks' time, that'll be up, and that is a great little conscious leadership assessment that people can take for free.
So, any final words before we wrap up?
Lead from your truest self. That's what the world needs. There's that wonderful saying: don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who are fully alive, and that will come from knowing who you really are, from your essence. Be conscious about that.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Ian, so much for beautiful morning tea. Because this is what we need. We need that awakening. We need to get up and we need to start moving the mind, and start looking at different things. So I really want to thank you, Ian, for sitting and having tea with me. I want to thank all the viewers and listeners that have joined us this morning. If you're watching a replay, please push #replay and let Ms. Liz know where you're tuning in from. And let me know what your TEA is, because we need to start really educating each other with our teas. Let's start pouring and spilling good tea. Spilling the tea doesn't mean gossip. It means good. It means teaching educational awareness that we all have a difference. We all make a difference with our stories. So I really want to thank you, Ian, for joining me. I want to thank all of the viewers and listeners. And if you're watching the replay again, please push hashtag replay. And I will see everybody Thursday with 3 shows. That's right, 3 shows: morning, afternoon, and evening. So we do have some incredible things that are coming to the table. So be sure to check that out. Check out Miss Liz's Facebook page. All of the information is there. LinkedIn, all of the good stuff, my website. And if you'd like to support Miss Liz, check out Miss Liz's shop. There's a lot of cool things in there. And there's also some things that will be coming in the future as well for Miss Liz. So I want to again thank you, Ian, for a beautiful morning tea. And let's really serve our teams. Let's really be good team leaders and do some good leadership within ourselves. So again, thank you. And I will see everybody Thursday morning, 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. for Tea Time with Miss Liz.